In today's video, I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks that you need for painting beautiful white flowers. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. On this channel, you'll find watercolor videos like this one, as well as watercolor pencils, drawing, mixed media, even a bit of business and motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. It's free to subscribe and I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube. If you'd like to further support the channel or get extra content all about color mixing, click the join button below to find out more. Painting anything white or clear can seem like an impossibility, particularly if you want to paint white flowers on a white background. In this video, I'm going to be sharing all of my tips with you. We're going to talk about negative spaces, 3 different background ideas. I'm going to tell you 3 colours that you shouldn't be mixing your petal shadows from. I'm going to tell you colours that you can use effectively to make beautiful clean shadows on your flowers that won't make them look dead or murky. We're going to talk about all the tips and tricks for making those white petals show up. So let's get started. Now, the success of painting white flowers actually starts at the drawing stage, because you do want some colour behind them to throw them forwards. That's not to say that you can't paint white flowers on a white background, but even if you're doing that, it's likely that you'd have some leaves. Let's talk about drawing and planning. So I've made a little sketch of some white blossom here. It might be a little bit difficult to see what's going on, but I've got one flower here. I've got another flower here, and then this one's on a stem, and I've got 3 leaves here. Now, this particular video is not meant as a full tutorial. I'm just going to be showing you elements, but you can find subjects like this on some of the copyright-free photograph websites if you'd like to have a go. Now, the first thing I'd consider doing here, because there's an awful lot of white space around this flower. Now, of course, I may put in a full background. I'm going to show you several options in this video. But the flowers are going to show up best and most dramatic against the bright leaves. So the first thing I'm going to think about doing on this picture is putting in at least one more leaf, particularly somewhere here. So in the original photograph, this sort of juts out into space and there's nothing there. But you can nearly always get away with putting another leaf behind. Now, if it's something like some tulips and the flowers themselves are way above the leaves, what you can find usually is there's usually some kind of plants behind, or you could even imagine a different tulip plant behind. You can always find an excuse, I find, to put more leaves in. So why don't we just take one from here? And I know what the leaves look like because I can see the shape of them in the rest of the picture. And we could take one perhaps around like this. And in order to get the shape right, I'll just draw through, and then I can just refine the shape of that leaf, get rid of parts that I don't need. And then all of a sudden, all of this part of the flower is now going to be defined by this green leaf behind. I think I might also just put in a smaller one over here, like so. And I can take that as far as I want, continuing to put more leaves in, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll leave it at that. Now, if you have a white petal and there's nothing behind it and it's on a white page, then unless there's some shadow on it, it's not going to show up. But not every single petal has shadow on it. So we're going to look at what to do in that situation. We're going to look at also 2 different types of background that you could possibly put behind your white flowers, and even situations where there might be a combination of these 3 types of background colour that are going to help your white flowers really show up. So the first question is background before flowers or flowers before background. The main thing to consider is strong colours. Strong colours tend to bleed when you try to paint next to them. So in the case of white flowers, I would probably put the flowers in first and then put the background behind. If they were bright red flowers, I'd likely do it the other way round. But I'm going to show you the background options first, because when it comes to planning your painting, it's a good idea to have an idea of what you're doing before you start. Of course, plans can change slightly as you go along, but backgrounds that people throw in right at the end of the painting when they hadn't planned to do one at the start nearly always end badly. So we've got 3 types of background we can do here. The first one is just a gentle, wet into wet, sort of soft focus background. This can be taken right up to the edge of the paper, but equally you could fade it out onto a clean layer of water like this. And I'm just going to grab some paint that I've already got in my palette here, and what we're doing here is working wet into wet, and in this case I'm going up to some clean water. You can go as light or dark as you like. You can use greens to indicate maybe some foliage in the background, or even things like soft pinks can look like distant flowers, or just any colours that you like. Now we've gone up to leaves here, but you can see that a soft background like this will enable our flower to show up against the background. I'll put some more in down here. Now I've painted over the edge of that petal a little bit. I'm not going to worry too much about that. It's rather hard to paint on YouTube because I have to sit further back than I would like, so my head doesn't get in the way of the picture. And lastly, let's go into this gap here as well. And you can see how a soft wet into wet background can give you the perfect outline for your white flowers. You no longer need to worry about them showing up against the background. And if you're wondering, I'm using paints here by Jackman's Watercolors in the UK. I do have my own sets of paints available from them. The next type of background that you can paint is a background of physical objects. Now these don't just have to be things like leaves. You might have other plants behind. You might have something like a fence or a wall or some rocks or even just some sky. I'm just going to use a watercolour pencil here to get some detail on this leaf. I'll pop the other ones in a moment when this area here is dried, because if I paint this leaf, for example, it's going to bleed into that background. But you can see how physical items can also throw your flowers forwards. Now, what if you've got an area and you're painting botanically and you've got a white flower and it's on white paper and you don't want to put a background in, but you need it to show up? This is when you can just put some random shadow in. This can be really subtle. Again, you need to start with an area of clean water. Take it out much further than you think you'll need to because the paint tends to travel. I'll talk more about the colours I'm using in a moment. Can you believe how annoyingly loud my cat is being? Don't bite my foot. He's literally biting my foot at the moment. Apologies for the cat noises. He's been doing it for ages, but I've been kind of, stopping so I can cut them out in the edit. He doesn't actually need anything. He just sounds like he's starving to death. I've only just fed him. You want to make sure you don't leave puddles with this. Now, it doesn't have to be as strong as that. This colour I've put on here is actually fairly pale, but it's dark enough to show up these white petals even once I've removed the pencil. If you're enjoying this video, can I just pop in and ask you, could you please click the like button, the thumbs up button? If you like this video, perhaps share it with a friend, leave me a comment, or subscribe to the channel, which is completely free. YouTube will push this video out to more people, and I can keep making free content that helps more people learn how to paint and draw. Let's talk now about mixing shadow colours. This is so very important, and this is where beginners often go wrong when trying to paint white flowers. It's so easy to make any kind of flowers look dead, especially white flowers. A gentleman I was dating years ago once sent me a red rose, but there was a delay in the postal service, and by the time I got it, it was dead. I don't think sending a woman a dead rose is perhaps the look he was going for. And the moral of this story is don't kill your flowers. Let me show you how to keep them alive. So I've put my greens and my shadows in. Now, as I said, if I were not doing this on YouTube, I'd probably do all of those greens and the background later on. But it's just going to help you to see the white flowers more clearly on camera. Now, in order to delineate each petal from another, and actually you don't have to have shadow around a petal. If that petal is already in shadow, it's going to show up against the background. So it's a matter of starting at the beginning and thinking about what colours things are going to be at the end of the painting. It's going to help you to know if you need to put something around a petal, and often you will. But in order to delineate each of these petals from the other, we're going to have to put some shadows on our white flowers, and this is where people often go wrong. So I'm going to give you 3 options that you absolutely should not be using. And then I'm going to give you 3 options that are going to work really well for shadows on petals. And I'll swatch them down the side here. So the first colour that you absolutely shouldn't be using is black. It should never be anywhere near a flower painting, with the possible exception of the centre of a poppy. Black is going to make your painting look dirty and muddy, and we don't want that for flowers. The next one you don't want to use is any kind of neutral tint or Payne's grey. Look at this neutral tint colour here by Jackman's. It would be great for a stormy sky, but even though it's fairly fresh compared to the black, I still don't think it's quite right for our flowers. Colours like Payne's grey can really be far too heavy, and many of them already contain black. The last thing you shouldn't be using is any kind of brown. This is raw umber. It's a very weak colour, so people are often attracted to the idea of using it in flower paintings. But what do flowers do when they die? They go brown, don't they? And so any kind of brown in your painting is going to make your flowers look dead. Now, what if you have a flower that actually has some dying parts on it and you want to be botanically accurate? What I would suggest you do is to mix some kind of brown from the reds and the yellows that you're already using in the painting, preferably those that you're already using in the flower itself, with a little touch of yellow. You'll make a colour that just looks like it's part of the plant rather than grabbing another earth colour and placing it on. Many earth colours are very heavy and granular and they will contribute to killing your flower. So let's look at 3 better options. I've got 2 that come straight from a tube and 1 that you can mix yourself. The first one is this one here. This is a colour I designed. You can buy it from Jackman's. It's in my flower painting set and my shadow set. You can also buy it separately. This is called Petal Shadow. It's a soft, granulating colour that almost separates on the page into lilacs and pinks. You can see it's a lilac-based grey, and I designed it that way so that not only would it work on white petals, but it will also go onto yellow petals without going green. The next colour I've got for you, this one's also by Jackman's, but many brands do this colour. This is Davies Grey. So you've probably heard of Payne's Grey, but have you heard of Davies Grey? It's a much weaker colour and it's slightly more green-based. It's a fabulous, delicate grey for botanicals, much less heavy than Payne's Grey. Your final option is to mix a grey just from colours that you're using in the painting already. You can start with any blue. Grey is always majority blue pigment, so you can grab a little bit of blue. This one's phthalo, so it's going to be strong. Then you need a little bit of pink. Pink preferably as opposed to a scarlet red. You're going to pop your pink in until it goes lilac. And then you can grab any yellow that you're using and push that in until you start to get a grey. If you just put a little in like that, you can end up with quite a lilac grey, or you can go heavier on the blue and end up with a more blue grey and get a really delicate grey that is much better than any of the first options that we looked at. One thing to mention at this point is you may not even need that much grey. You may find that there are hints of yellow and pink in your flower already. Look at this petal here. We could certainly just use pink down here. You want to use the minimum shadow colour that's available to you. If I was painting something like a yellow daffodil, all of the shadow or the darker areas might actually be yellow or greenish yellow. I wouldn't need to use a grey at all. If you're going for a botanical approach, you're going to need to show up one petal against another. We're going to do this by using hard and soft edges. There are almost never hard edges within a petal itself, but there certainly are hard edges where one petal overlaps another. It's actually easier for me to show you than to talk about it, so let's look at that now. So let's look at hard and soft edges within a flower. Now, I said that there are no hard edge shadows actually within a flower petal. There is an exception to that rule, and that's if you ever have a photograph that's taken or if you're working from life and it's bright midday sun and things are actually casting strong shadows onto the petals. You'll find that other petals and other parts of the plant may be casting those shadows on. In that case, you want to put them in right at the end on dry paper, put them in quite cleanly and leave them alone. But more often than not, you'll see something like what we're going to do today. So let's look, for instance, at this petal here. It's behind the others. So what we need is some shadow in here. And if you're not sure where to place the shadow, always anything that goes behind or that's in the center or that's low down, because shadow areas recede and light areas come forward. So we need some shadow down here. It's going to allow us to separate this petal from these two. And it's going to be more natural that it would be behind than in front. We don't want the shadow to go all the way up the flower, and we don't want it ending on an uncomfortable hard edge. However, there will be a sharp edge either side here because these two petals in front are cutting it off. So I've changed to a smaller brush. In fact, I've got a lovely brand new brush here. I don't know about you, but I'm very tight about my brushes. I keep them for ages brand new. I didn't want to take them out of the casing and use them, but I'm being good today and using a new brush because it's got a nice sharp point on. And I'm going to use my petal shadow colour just because it's easier. And what I'm going to do is take the paint here. You see I put the clean water up here, and then we can go straight in here with the paint, and we'll come up until it hits the water. At that point, you may need to rinse your brush and just sweep across a little bit. Now I've gone quite dark there. That's going to enable you to see it on camera. Wouldn't always go as dark as that. Now this petal here, it's hard to tell, but it actually curves round. So we're looking sort of at the underneath of it there. So we have an option of putting some shadow here. Again, I'll go in with clean water. Now you'll notice that I don't allow the water to puddle. I'm working on quite difficult paper here. This is actually quite smooth paper because it's a cheap old practice paper. You'll find this much easier and you'll get a much prettier effect on more of a textured paper. We're going in here. I don't want to go too dark, so I'm going to clean my brush. If that second colour starts to spread rapidly across, it means that you've gone in with paint that's too wet. Just one of the reasons, so I'm going in with this dry paint here. You can use tube paint just as easily. Just don't go too wet with it. Don't mix too much water in with it. And I can continue to work across delineating each of these petals. Now there may be areas of a petal that are completely in shadow. There are two of the petals here that actually tip over. So what I'll do here is I'll just get some colour ready. And then I can paint that across that whole area. And I'm letting each petal dry before I paint next to it. This will keep our clean botanical look. If you paint in a looser style than this, you'll still be able to use all of these hints and tips. You can just be a little bit freer with your water use. So you see how I'm starting to help each petal to show up against another. I want a little bit of shadow down in the center of this one here. So here goes the clean water. Here goes the shadow color in the middle. Now it's easy when you start using this technique to end up covering up all the white in your flower. So it's really important that you leave some pure white. Otherwise, even if you've used all the right colors, you can still make your flowers look a little bit dull. So put the minimum shadow on to delineate each petal. Ask yourself, once the pencil is erased, will I be able to see where the edge of each petal is? If you do work in a looser style, it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of a lost and found edge here and there, as long as overall you're getting this beautiful flower shape with a few shadows on the petals. In my spare time, I go to Tai Chi classes and we learn a lot about yin and yang. And one of the principles is that there is no light without darkness. And this is certainly the case when painting flowers. It might seem counterintuitive, but you're going to need some very strong darks. However, within the flower itself, they must be kept very, very small, but nevertheless, they're important. So we've got our shadows on. They still look like white flowers, but we can see the difference between each of the petals. I'm going to put some stamens in now. Is that the right word? I'm never quite sure what the parts of flowers are called. I'm going to use a bit of this diarylide yellow, and possibly a little more of the green gold, and we'll put a few in here. I'm basically making these flowers up with a little bit of reference material. What I want to do is go dark in the center here. I'm going to get a bit more of this color that I used for the leaves, and I'm just going to go in the middle here quite strongly. You can often see touches of dark green between the petals. Or of course you might have some pink or some red in there. We want to really make that center of the flower stand out. I'm going to use a little of this down the side of the stamens as well. We can blend out softly with water wherever we want to. You need a bit of drama in the middle of the flower. Once you've done this, you may want to go back as well and darken certain areas of the background by going over them, putting more leaves in, or going darker with the leaves that you have got. Because at the end of the picture, it's all about the drama. Even if you don't see any of the dark green in there, you can get your shadow colour, even a gentle colour like this. If we use it without much water, we can go in there and really get some strong dark in the middle. And these really, really tiny touches of strong colour in the centre of your flower are going to give it that dark, three-dimensional look. Consider going darker behind the gaps between the petals, like this one here. These are such tiny areas, but they make such a difference to the end of your painting to give a beautiful dramatic look and make your white flowers look really beautiful. As I said, you could go much darker than I have done in the background here. You can't always tell how dark a painting's background needs to be. And even once you've put it in, you may want to go darker later on. I'm really happy with how these white flowers have turned out. I'm going to go and throw a ball for my cat now before he completely destroys my ankles. Let me know in the comments which of these tips you found most useful. Have you tried painting white flowers yourself? Perhaps you're feeling a little bit more confident now. And before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. I've got all sorts of free stuff down there for you. There's some free downloadable PDF guides. There's a free watercolor painting course that you can take for no money whatsoever. And if you're looking for something a bit more extensive and a bit more structured, I do of course have paid courses. Those are also linked in the video description so you can have a look at those. I've even got some mini courses where you can do a whole flower painting with me. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're going to enjoy another flower painting video. You can watch that one right now.